So,
well, hopefully we can, because there was quite a story in the Globe about Norwood, which you probably have their managed.
yeah,
You know, towns figured out ways to comply with the law and lessen the impact on the towns.
true. That's what I think all of us would say that.
Yep. And there are several options that we can discuss that would allow for compliance with a relatively small buildable area within the radius itself. But we are bound to the formula that 40% of units have to be zoned for within that circle.
No, we all understand that.
Okay, thank you for all who are joining us now. I do apologize for the technical difficulties. My name is Catherine Fierick. I'm the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the town of Foxborough. We're going through MBTA communities one more time. I know that many of you are familiar with it already. And we just want to have a conversation with residents. This is one of several formal sessions, and we'll get into opportunity in person. Foxborough. I'm also going to be out in the community piggybacking informally on events. So you're probably going to see my face around, and feel free to stop by and tell me your thoughts on MBTA communities, ask me any questions you may have. But just for folks at home, very quickly, what is MBTA communities? If you're not familiar with this is a 2001 law that requires communities that have a commuter rail station like Foxborough to construct zoning districts where multifamily housing is allowed by right. So what we're here to do today is just to discuss the regulation itself, talk about it from a very high level. What's the town's role? What are some of the regulatory, I guess, requirements and the consequences if we aren't able to get into compliance, and to talk about just next steps and what we can face. So my role in the process as town planner is I'm going to be informing residents of the requirements of the law itself, as well as any additional explanations or running through some scenarios and practices and economic impact analyses that people might request from me, so that residents really understand the process as we're going through it. Second is what I'm doing today, which is engaging residents, allowing people to ask questions of me, give me their thoughts, their concerns. Finally, I'm going to be trying to comply 2 separate districts for vote at town meeting. That way residents can discuss, they can decide on option A, option B, or neither. So you'll have a final say in the process. So I'll be presenting these in November at the special town meeting on November 18th, but we'll have plenty of engagement opportunities until then. And now we're back to where we were right before the stream started. So I'd like to ask our town council, Jay Tallerman, to speak about what happens if the town votes not to accept either of the options.
Will they pick me up if I'm here? Or yep. Okay, great. So as is shown on this slide, there are 4 where there are immediate concerns for non-compliance by the particular date. There's 4 enumerated grant programs here that the town will automatically be ineligible for if we don't pass this zoning by the end of the year. We have other concerns, though, and we're not exactly sure where the state is going to end up on this. But in addition to these grants, some of which might be minor grants or grants you've never heard of, but some of which are for significant municipal infrastructure projects like road or intersection improvements that are very visible and that every town relies on. There are other impacts with respect to grants that are not listed here, because what we are hearing from the state is that in addition to the grants you're ineligible from receiving, there are other grants where we might score poorly. All grants that when we apply for as a town, other towns are applying for them too. And the state will grade the town's application. And we are hearing there is going to be a box to check on many of these grants, which is, have you adopted MBTA zoning? And if you haven't, that could adversely impact your score. Some of those grants are minor and small, and some of them could be huge, like school construction reimbursement. We don't know exactly yet what may happen there. These are just things that we are concerned about moving forward. The only information that we have to date relates to a single town, the town of Milton, which was in the first round. There are 3 rounds of compliance. The first round was last year for the kind of very close to Boston communities. The second round we're in now, which goes through the end of this calendar year. The third round is for the smallest of the communities, which ends next year. There's only one town in technical non-compliance right now. That's Milton, so the state is hyper-focused on them. In this round, we already know that a little more than a dozen towns have said no. We don't know if the state is going to sue them all the way they've sued Milton to try and get compliance, or if there'll be an extension, or if there'll be a period to discuss what compliance may mean or not mean. What we do know is that the state is taking this very seriously. And whether it was the Baker administration, which drafted this originally, or the current administration, the Healy administration, they mean business and they've sent that signal to us. So as council, we get concerned about non-compliant stuff. That's our job.
So, if I may? All right, just so you guys remind you, Mark Elfman, Board of Selectmen. So obviously, on our list of things coming up in the schools is the Taylor School, just to be more specific for the town of Foxborough. I guess we went through the first round, state put us to the next round of renovation of the school just down the street here. So to be very Foxborough specific, that box gets checked off next year. When it comes through again, we could potentially be put on the bottom of a list.
So we don't know.
Right, I know we don't know.
But MSBA loans are the big kahuna for most
Right.
suburban communities.
Huge.
Tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Tens of millions.
45 to 50% of the,
As a municipal advocate, it makes me nervous.
okay, all right. And two, for those of us that don't really know, what is exactly happening with Milton? I thought it was the other way around. I thought Milton went after the state to,
So a little bit of both.
Okay.
So the Milton, actually, their town meeting passed it, but they're a representative town meeting, so they have this opportunity for referendum process. And under the referendum, they essentially reverse the town meeting vote, which representative town meeting communities can do pursuant to their charters. So when they didn't comply by the deadline, the state sued them. The town sued back, saying that the statute is unconstitutional under the Massachusetts Constitution. I think that both the state and the town make interesting points. My own personal view as an attorney, and who knows what the court says, because they're going to give a certain amount of deference to the state, is that the state can't compel a town to do anything. They can certainly find a town in non-compliance and impose the penalties that are listed in the statute. But I don't know how you could compel a town meeting, which is a legislative assembly made up of citizens, to take action. So I think the state has gone too far in that litigation. In the same token, I think the town, which is saying that forcing a certain kind of zoning on a town is against the Home Rule Amendment to the Massachusetts Constitution, which we all love as municipal practitioners and officials, that argument also falls flat, in my opinion.
really?
There's a number of things that the state already does that kind of abridges home rule when it comes to zoning. The Dover Amendment, which protects farms, religious, educational, group homes, daycare, solar facilities, and other kinds of things, and says you can't regulate this under zoning. They've already done that. Chapter 40B, which relates to affordable housing. They've said, we can wipe out your affordable or your local zoning bylaws and other local bylaws that you adopted by home rule for this affordable housing purpose. Home rule doesn't mean that the state can't touch what you do locally. It actually means that you can do whatever you want locally as long as it doesn't violate a state statute. So it kind of, I think Milton's argument is weak. I think part of the state's argument is weak. I think Milton is at risk. Now, they're a town that relies heavily on grant money. That's their big risk.
So, okay. Yeah.
Some of that's conjecture. So status-wise,
But also, the precedent is set with the Dover rule and 40B that the state can do.
yeah. And so when I see that as a lawyer and someone who litigates these things, as a municipal practitioner, I don't love 40B. I love the housing. Don't get me wrong. Housing can be a very good thing. I don't love the statute. I don't love the Dover Amendment, even though there's some good results from it. But telling a town you can't do something or you can't regulate, as someone who represents towns, I don't love that. But like you said, the precedent is set. So in Milton, the argument before the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts is in October. It is extremely unlikely we'll have a decision by the end of the year. Anyone that's ever participated in the legal process knows that would be light speed for a court.
Yeah, which gets us back to the point that what we're doing now is we're trying to find a way to comply with a regulation, not knowing the drawbacks. We don't know the cons of, what happens to us if we can't find a compliant district that passes a town meeting vote. So I wish that I could give everybody, all the residents, more assurance as to the cost-benefit analysis that we're facing here, but just given the situation and the timeline that we're facing, a lot of that's not going to be possible. So I want people to hear that very clearly from us. We wish that we could tell you these will be the absolute set in stone. This is the dollar amount it'll cost the town, but just it's all moving right now.
But I think it would be a good, well, you're probably going to do this, idea to give the worst case, what we believe is the worst case. If we get the low marks here and all this goes away, here's what the financial impact would be if we say no. I don't think that's against wisdom to do.
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
The
Absolutely.
worst case scenario is well into 8 figures.
Let it be. Now, people say, oh, that's not going to happen, we'll vote no anyway, and just see what happens, who knows?
It's a legislative assembly. They have every right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right, so next up, haven't we already voted on this? And that was the first question I was greeted with today before this session even started. Yeah, the answer is yes. We did vote on it. It failed in the spring-fall meeting. That does not mean that we are not beholden to the law. We have until December to try to comply. So this exercise is trying to go back to the basics and build from the ground up and try to find a way to make it a compliant district with the least amount of disruption as possible, and while taking residents' feedback into consideration. And again, at the end of the day, you can still vote no. You won't hurt my feelings by it, but I'll be a little bit anxious about future conditions, obviously. And what is the process and timeline? I do have 4 more of these types of sessions, these evening sessions. In August, really, I want to hear from you all. I do want to provide you with some of the context like our council just provided of where things stand from a legal and regulatory and land use type of perspective. But most of the stuff I do want to hear from you all. So we'll have 2 meetings in August where I'm going to be listening more than talking, hopefully. Then September, I'm going to be asking some questions to help guide this conversation. I'm probably going to use some, maps with puzzle pieces where people can kind of start thinking about, okay, what areas can we live with versus the absolutely no line in the sand, no way, Jose. By the end of September, I'm hoping that we can start narrowing the field down a little bit and hear from some other stakeholders. And then in October, I'm going to have one final one of these where I reveal the 2 plans and I take final comments and feedback on them. So that way, if there's something that, overall is pretty good, but I missed something that somebody said, you can correct me, you can stop the process, you can say, okay, can we modify this a little bit? And we'll have more time to do that before town meeting. After that, the process for our town meeting is such that we really can't have one final meeting in October as much as I'd like to, just because it has to go through planning board and AdCom and all that. So I would like to open it up to you all for more questions on the regulatory nature of this, the process of it, anything that you might have at this point.
Okay. One question. What's the minimum number of units that have to be built within, what is it, the half mile of the train station?
Yeah, that's next, actually. So this is, I want, like, I can answer your question. It's 1,152, but I want to discuss, like, regulatory stuff before we proceed, just so that,
Okay, but,
sure.
okay, then fine, you'll get to.
Yep. Any other questions about, like, the legislation, the consequences, the, what I'm doing, if there are any improvements that you can suggest, or any stakeholder groups that I should reach out to directly? I'm already planning to reach out to all the property owners within the 0.5 mile radius for sure. But any other groups that you think I should be talking to?
Well, other groups, I mean, definitely go to the senior center.
I will
Talk
be.
to the grub, sure, that's already on your
Yeah,
list.
yeah.
You know, this is going to be looping, certainly, hopefully people will go onto YouTube or Foxboro Cable Access and do it. I think, you know, if legal isn't here the next time you do it, maybe his little portion can be dubbed in, you
Yeah,
know.
sure.
You know, this is him live, this is him next week, you know. But this same, you know, I'm sure you can cut out a little bit, and so people can hear that the next time too, just as suggestions. And just get it out there that,
Yeah.
you know, if you want to know what's going on, you know, you got to attend
Yeah.
one of these meetings and ask some questions, because, you know, right now.
Absolutely. I want to hear everything right now. So even if the answer is community character, we don't want more multifamily housing, period, I want to hear that just so that I can get a good pulse of the town.
Well, I think you weren't at the last town meeting. You weren't on board yet, and you know, those of us, I think, we were all there. Yeah, you were there, weren't you? Yeah, you were there. I don't think you've missed one in 40 years, but.
More.
So, but I mean, it comes down to, you know, the state putting a lot of us an undue burden, not only on the community for the 1,100, but the downward spiral of what happens 5 years from now with the school system, public safety. I mean, does the state realize that a community like ours and yours, you know, all of a sudden, you know, 1,100 units, 2 kids per unit, 2,200 kids into a school system that is just, I can't even think of. I mean, I saw what happened when 40 kids entered the system with the housing last year, what it did. You know, I couldn't imagine, you know, does the state realize that? Does the state, I mean, I know you probably can't answer this, but do they realize, you know, what it's going to do to little communities like ours? Are they just saying, the hell with you guys, you know, this is what we feel the housing crisis needs?
Well, it's a one-size-fits-all formulaic response to a very complicated crisis. I'll just give you an example of a different type of community where it also didn't work, and that's Attleboro, where I was working previously. So it wasn't that the community didn't support more housing, and particularly by the train station, but we were already doing it. We had a transit-oriented development zone that was carefully designed to allow for multifamily residential, but with a requirement for first floor retail where it made sense. I mean, when you're going to the train station, you want to grab a coffee first, or a newspaper, or run into a CVS, or drop your kids off to a daycare, whatever. And you know, the way that it's laid out, by right multifamily housing, like they do allow for a path where you can have both, but it's very convoluted and challenging for a community to really follow. So really what you're left with is you have to take the risk that the market will force people because it'll just be too lucrative. So they have to build the first floor retail. But you're really taking a gamble even in a community that accepts the housing. So I would say that it was an imperfect strategy for all types of communities. I'll also say that as a renter with kids, I don't think that you're going to get too many by Gillette Stadium just because of the noise, the late hours, things like that, and there's no restriction for income that's required under this legislation. So it's not going to be like a 40B where families are drawn to that because they can't afford anything else. It's going to be more of a luxury product in all likelihood. So, I mean, it's not a full answer to your question. It's a statewide model.
I think that there's an important distinction here too, and I'm not speaking for or against it. And I'm actually pretty cynical about what the state's done because they want to win, but the way it's set up, towns can draft these in a way so that there's an extreme low likelihood of ever building even close to the number of units that would actually be possible, because you could put the zone over an area that was just recently developed or that is not going to change hands, which is what my town did for the most part. There's very low likelihood of it ever coming to fruition, especially if you have limited sewer or public water or things like that. But if someone recently built on something, they would have to tear it down. So those are some of the strategies. But unlike 40B, where developers choose a location and then take a hacksaw to your local bylaws, here we're giving the only possible location where it could happen under this statute. And we can be very selective. Now, some towns have chosen to do kind of what my town did and choose locations where it's unlikely to develop much, if any, zoning. Some towns have done it where they want the housing and there's broad opportunities in some cities too. And some towns have done a hybrid, like, okay, in this 20-acre section, this would be good. In this big section, was just developed last year, so it's unlikely, or there's no sewer or whatever. So there's different strategies there to kind of limit the impact. In some ways, I worry less about this kind of zoning than I do about 40B, where any vacant lot could be a level of housing that you could not have forecasted.
That was the story that was in the Globe about Norwood, is that they overlaid Windsor Gardens, a almost brand-new Avalon Bay facility, and one other high-density apartment complex. As I said, fully compliant with the state law, likelihood of being built zero. What we saw in the spring was a shovel-ready parking lot on Route 1. And I think every resident looked at that. There was somebody who stood up at town meeting and said, well, we're not sure it will be built. And I don't think there was a person in the audience who listened to him. I think the assumption has to be, if you zone it and you comply with the law, there's a chance it's going to be built.
There's a chance. There's always a chance.
Always a chance. And looking at an empty parking lot was just too frightening to me, because I saw 1,150 units going in there. I don't think I was the only person in the audience who saw that. And, that came across loud and clear. I think we look at Foxborough, we know we have the Lodge and Sylvan, fairly new complexes that have been built. Overlays of those to absorb some of the numbers, in all likelihood, reduces they're going to be built.
Yes.
Do you know what he's talking
Yep.
about when he, okay.
Some of the issues with Foxborough that are unique, and Catherine can speak about this more than I could, is that because you have to have some of the area within a certain proximity, you have to be careful. So you would want to do like the bare minimum over vacant developable land if that is the goal, to make it just to minimize the concern over full build out.
That was my-
Difficult here, whereas other towns that have their MBTA station in their town center where it's already developed, they're in a different kind of situation.
Oh, that was the beauty for Norwood. The train line snakes through town.
Well, Norfolk too. I mean,
Yeah, and I think Walpole's looking at that now.
yeah, I mean, they recently did all that development around their train station.
So,
Not too many parcels left.
but my original question to you, and I'm not sure if you heard me right, was what is the minimum number we have to build close to the train station? Because I know you can build some and then you can expand out.
Yeah. So at least 40% of all units have to be zoned for within that half-mile radius. So
So you're saying about 400?
thereabouts, yeah, a little over 400 units would have to be zoned for within that circle. The total capacity of the district that needs to be zoned is 1,152. Again, they don't have to, they can be zoned over recently developed properties or properties that already meet those density criteria, so that there's minimal, readjustment as a result of the zoning. But that 40% has to be located within the half-mile radius. Other things about this, I did mention the district can be layered over existing uses, but not wetlands, rivers, public infrastructure. They take those out of the developable area in their calculation. And there can't be any restrictions on resident age, so it can't be something where, you require individuals to, like for a senior housing development.
Yeah, just to add to what Mr. Powers was saying, when we were working on the previous iteration of the plans, we did consider overlaying the domain and the lodge, and we thought they might have been too close to the neighborhood. There's a minimum amount of acreage that has to be part of, a parcel has to be a minimum number of acreage besides the 40%. And it would have to have been overlaid some of the residential areas as well because of that. But, that's something that we can reconsider.
And there are other areas that might, in terms of acreage, be better suited for that, like Chestnut Green area might have the acreage that we need. And there are other limitations there in terms of like utilities.
Does Chestnut Green fall within the half mile?
It does not, so that would be the 60% that you can zone outside the bubble.
It must be awfully close, though.
It's about a mile.
It's a ways out,
It's
yeah.
a mile,
Yeah.
yeah. Two other points if I can. If you get a chance to watch the last town meeting, there was a gentleman that got up and sort of reminded us a little bit about Patrick Henry and give us liberty and give us death. He was pretty passionate. And, opposite the gentleman that said, we could put it on, in a parking lot and it never be built. That's the other end of the spectrum. You might want to hear, his speech and, the reaction from the crowd
Yeah,
after he got done getting up. And it's mostly, it was quite a bit about, the state mandates and
Yeah.
so, you're going to have, I want you to be aware, you're going to have that. It might
Yeah,
be
of
worth
course.
a
Yeah.
worth a peek at that when you got nothing better to do and you need to fall asleep. But another quick question, and I'm sorry, I got texted to me. Give me a sec. At one point, one question is, could we delete or eliminate the MBTA station? Because it's not very functional. And how would that change our requirement?
We actually have another community that had that same thought, but the MBTA said, we're not going anywhere. So that was their strategy, but there was no way to convince the MBA to leave a parcel that they had the rights to, that were part of their infrastructure plan. So if we could snap a finger and, change our geographical location or our geographical demand for under this, then might be easy, but I don't think the MBTA would quite go along with it.
I would also say that 2026, they're hosting the World Cup, and that would
I
make
know.
things
Believe me.
an absolute nightmare.
No, they're very, I don't know about the day-to-day commute, but they're very
Right.
proud of the fact that they're in Patriots games and 4 concerts out of 5 days next week that they got rail service to come
Yeah, yeah.
Foxborough.
So the next slide is a map just showing that radius. I've been talking about it a lot, and I wish that I could have like a separate slide of just the map so that we could just look at it throughout our conversations, right? But it shows the location of the train station itself and the perimeter of, a half mile outward. As you can see on the right side of the screen, there's a park area, there's a lot of wetlands, and there are tons of single-family homes. I'm going to be doing a mailer to each of them, and I'm going to invite them to their own event so that they can really address the very local concerns to them. On the right side, it's mainly surface lots. The primary owner is the Craft Group. It's the majority owner within all this land. They will probably become involved in the conversation as it expands and unfolds. Obviously, they will have their desires as a property owner, but it's up to the residents of the town because this is a town meeting issue. So I think it's a good idea to listen to them and see what they might propose, but at the same time, it lies in the hands of the residents at the end of the day. So other features within this are a number of wetlands to the north. The district that was voted down in spring of this year is on the far right of the screen. A little bit of it, a jagged edge of parcels, is just outside the radius, and it stops at the property line before the big pond or lake that's up at the top of the screen. So that was the original proposal for the district. It's mainly surface lots, primarily owned by the Craft Group. I think there are a couple of other owners of the smaller parcels. But that was one possibility. And what I'd like to hear, and I've heard some of it already, and it's all really helpful, is like what happened last time? What were some of the sticking points? What were some of the approaches that maybe didn't work? What were some of the just like the large scale? I'm looking at like 1,000 feet right now. I'm not yet ready to get into like, the nitty gritty of exactly where this thing should be or what it should look like, how tall it should be, whatever. I don't think we're there yet. I just want to know like the big overarching feeling about the legislation. And I know that you've shared a lot of that already, but any other thoughts that you have would be really helpful.
I mean, I think what you've heard, and would reiterate it, the state coming down with a cookie cutter and saying, okay, you're a host community, you have a rail station, so, you're gonna do this percentage. And Foxborough is building senior housing right now, affordable senior housing. It's like, maybe there should have been credits for that. Because that's going on and that's going to be brand new, and that lends itself to addressing affordable housing and the homeless situation. But that doesn't count. And that is part of the mix here. Foxborough has, the Domain and the Lodge, which are fairly large apartment complexes. We have a large percentage of our town is rental property. I forget that figure, but I know I've heard it. And we're right up there with any town going. So it seems from, a homeowner's perspective, we're being asked to do a lot. Where maybe other towns haven't been stepping up in the past. And what you heard earlier is, I know what this spells, it's higher taxes. We can see an impact on our schools. The first words out of probably our two chiefs are gonna be substation.
Forgot about that, right?
Yep, so
Substation.
a building, personnel, equipment, and there's only one way to pay for that, that's taxes. So, it's a large impact on the community. The problem I saw with the proposal in the spring was that it was 1,150. That the failure to try and mitigate that number down was just something I didn't understand. There are clearly steps that other towns have taken to try and reduce the number. And we were looking at saying, here you go. I didn't get it. And I think if you were to come back with a plan like that, you'd see the exact same results.
Sure. That's very helpful. Yeah, thank you. So any other thoughts about, like, just high level right now? Any absolute no areas on the map?
What has been the consideration, just out of curiosity, of overlaying over some of the existing commercial development there, like the?
I would love that as an economic developer. Patriot Place performs very well during event days, but there are, some struggling businesses in there, and a big result of the fact that when there is no event, people like you or I would probably avoid it just because we don't know if there's an event or not. And that leads to a lower level of foot traffic at Patriot Place. If
Right.
there were like a kind of a captive audience type of thing, if you were to build it above, it would have very minor impacts on the overall, construction of the area. But at the same time, it would support those businesses. So as an economic developer.
And like the trucking terminal there,
The trucking terminal's a different matter because the trucking terminal is surrounded by single-family homes on two sides. So that context is very important. We need to talk to the residents that abut it. What, if anything, could make them amenable to development of that site? So, that would be a more challenging site in my opinion, because that's a site that could be torn down and redeveloped just because of its current use.
Yeah, that's not functioning as a trucking terminal.
right.
Yeah. So that one, like, just the context, I think, would be a little more challenging. If the neighbors were amenable to it and said, yeah, let's do this, which,
And some of it is optics, like the Rodman site, there's different, you have to look at likelihood of redevelopment or partial redevelopment, building up in and around Patriots Place. Also, you can bet if there's an interest in the craft group of developing any housing near their facility, then they're going to want to try and influence that process if they feel it's good for them.
and they did send the town, in the last iteration, they did send the town their preferences. I don't know if those were ever, like, included in a public meeting, but I would be happy to, well, I'd talk to them first before sharing them, but I mean, they're public record anyway.
They were presented at
They were
the
presented.
planning board meeting, yes.
Okay, yeah, so I'm happy to include those. In a recent conversation, they seemed to be still pursuing those possibilities, so.
I think it's real important that you meet with Ashcroft and, as I discussed last night, Beach Street, Meadowview. But what you don't know is a couple of years ago, at one point, they were thinking of putting a warehouse on Route 1 behind Meadowview. And the community banded together quite strongly. So, get a lot of feedback from them, but there's
Absolutely.
going to be a lot of pushback.
Yep, and I understand that, and that's, again, I've been in planning and economic development my whole career, so people can feel free to tell me whatever they need to tell me. I'm not going to, respond negatively at all, because it's all very helpful to me at this stage. As I said to some folks that came in earlier, like, there are certain things that I can't do anything to mitigate, and if the answer is just no, we don't want more housing, period, then, it's helpful for me to hear, but there's nothing that I can do to assuage that. But things like economic impacts or need for enhanced safety services or, school impacts, things like this, I can actually run some numbers, look at some comparables, and get residents information that they can use to make their decisions. So, feel free, like, anybody who's listening at home too, just, like, tell me whatever is on your mind, because I'm not gonna react negatively at all. It's all helpful to me at this stage.
The state's offering a stick approach to this. Is there a carrot? I mean, if you agree to the zone, are they saying, well, that will mean you'll get more funds? Or is it just, well, we won't check the box that says you're non-compliant?
We haven't heard that side of it from the state, that we've heard that you might score worse. We haven't heard that you might score better.
That would kind of trigger them looking weak, I think, at this point. Because we haven't gone to the mat with, nobody's gone to the mat really yet. I mean, they're going, but it hasn't been decided. I agree with you, though. I like the idea. But I wouldn't think that they would come up with.
It's one thing for the state to take on a single community. If at the end of 2024, there's 17 communities, that's a taller order where they might want to rethink some of their carrots and sticks a little bit. I don't think we're ever going to see them back down on this. They have a goal for housing, and most people agree that there's a housing problem. So I don't like the way they're pursuing it. It's a bit of a blunt instrument, but maybe they throw some more carrots at it. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting December, that's for sure.
But I've seen no carrots. I've only seen sticks.
Yeah, it's mostly that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to them, the carrot's the housing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, true. Carrot for them, not for the communities.
I mean, that's not the way they spin it. They say your community needs housing, needs more affordable housing, and more units helps you maintain that. They don't look down deeper into, and again, this is the cynical approach, because some of this housing actually is good and important housing, and say if you build something on Route 1 that it's just a transient development for corporate relocation or whatever, and you're not really helping the housing. It's not affordable housing necessarily. So there's all kinds of views on this. Their approach right now is build more housing.
And one of the problems, when the discussion started about locating housing around transportation hubs, it was well before COVID.
Oh, well before.
People were commuting into cities. What COVID has done to upset the apple cart is the vacancy rate in the city of Boston. I think I read this morning, it's 24% commercial buildings.
Certainly at historical highs, yeah.
And that means people aren't commuting into work anymore. And the need for people locating close to transportation hubs is sort of diminished. So maybe at one time, this sounded like a good proposal. And I had to chuckle a little bit when you were talking about retail, where people on their way to the train might catch a paper.
My husband just took the train into work today, so
Right,
there are
but-
still plenty of commuters.
But nobody's grabbing a paper. You probably
Well,
can't
yeah,
find a
that's-
place with a paper.
Yeah.
And
Coffee.
Coffee.
They're still grabbing coffee.
Yeah, coffee.
no doubt about the coffee. But that's my problem, that, when they started looking at this, it was easily a decade ago. A lot of significant changes have occurred to society, the way business is conducted, and nobody went back and looked at the plans and said, is it still valid?
Nothing is 100% of anything, so it's all blended. Is there a need for housing? Most people would agree that there's some need for housing. Do people still want to, is housing, from a planning perspective, is it still good despite a loss of some of the urban hubs as work centers? Is there still a need for housing around mass transportation? There is still. Not as much, but in the same token, is there need for control of sprawl because now people are working more from home? So there's a lot of sides to the coin. No one is right and no one is necessarily wrong in these arguments. There's a lot of good points to be made on both sides of it.
True.
Yeah, and one thing that I think really speaks to, just from an economic perspective, like the precariousness of Massachusetts, is that, in my profession as an economic developer, I spoke to a lot of factories that were trying to reshore. There's a historic boom right now in the industrial area, but in Massachusetts, nobody can afford to work industrial jobs. There are factories that are overseas that could be reshored, and all that economic value brought online, all those new jobs, but we're bleeding people of prime working years. Like anybody from 40 and below, the state is just absolutely bleeding those individuals because they can't afford a starter home. They can't afford to, move up into a larger home for their expanding families. And, you're seeing the economic impacts of it already. We still need people who take care of our, elderly parents at home. We still need people who, deliver the milk on Monday mornings. And those jobs don't typically pay enough to even rent in Massachusetts anymore. So everybody's either living in one of the surrounding states and having a long commute, or they're really just bare knuckling it right now. So demographically, it's going to become an increasing challenge. I don't know. I don't think that this approach is necessarily the best way to confront it, but there is a need for more housing in the state, and even building luxury prestige units frees up a vacancy somewhere else if somebody moves into it, and therefore it increases the supply across the board, and it has been shown to reduce rents overall if you build new housing anywhere. So my hope is that we can find a path that limits the impact to the town residents, and that people can get out and say, okay, well, this is a fair shot at it, and we'll give it a whirl and hopefully avoid some of the consequences that we might be looking at. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. It's just what concerns me is just not knowing that downside of what happens if it fails to pass at town meeting and we're out of compliance. Like, what does that do to the bottom line? That's the question that I worry about. But again, it could be an issue where the residents are happy to absorb it to preserve the community character, and that's the democratic process.
You're doing the right thing, doing what you're doing. Yeah, that's.
As I told Paige, our town manager, I said, I may not be successful in this, and that's fine, but nobody can point to me and say I'm not trying. So anyway, for anybody at home or here that wants to contact me, give me all of your feedback, all of the concerns that you have. It's really important for me to understand where people sit right now, because that's going to help me in the future to determine where to spend my energies in the very limited amount of time that we have.
Awesome.
All right.
You
thanks.
said 28th and then October 9th. I didn't.
Yeah.
I left my pencil in the car. Okay.
There you go. Yeah, August 14th and 28th. It's the second and fourth Wednesdays of the
'cause
month.
I'm going to go on I'm going to go on the Uptown Happenings and post all that stuff.
Great.
On the Facebook page. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Doc, come on, man. No wonder that's why you're a selectman.
Yeah.
Take a pic.
I also posted this slide deck, and I'm going to start building out a website on Choose Foxborough. There's a tab there now that says MBTA Communities, and that's going to be the repository for all the information that we discuss. As of now, it's kind of a skeleton page, but I'm going to be working to really beef it up over the next few weeks so that if people have questions, hopefully they can find the answers there, and if not, I'm always available to have a conversation. So, thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you.
all your comments. you.